All right, so let's react to this Chris Hedges video. So Chris Hedges has been like a member of the Green Party. He's been saying forever that electoral politics is a crapshoot, right? Voting for the squad, voting for AOC, voting for these folks is going to do nothing. We need a revolutionary shock to the system outside of electoral politics. Now, I don't know if he's a Marxist. Technically, he's more of like a Green Party guy, progressive, but he's been against the electoral strategy from the beginning. Which is interesting now that you see the squad moving to being more neoliberal. All the stuff that we've been talking about, getting corrupted by the system in many ways. So Chris Hedges has kind of been proven right, but Chris Hedges doesn't always bring things back to the class struggle and doesn't always say we need economic organization and community organization at the base of society in order to enact real change, which is what I think is sort of the Marxist position or Marxist path forward, revolutionary path forward. Chris Hedges doesn't always bring it to that. He almost kind of seems a little bit pessimistic at times, but he's still a very, very smart analyst. So yeah, let's see what his input is here today.
We go to the street. We look at people Standing Rock. We look at all of the great radical movements that were shut out of power. I mean, we've gone through vicious periods of American history. I don't know if you know James Cone, but if you don't, you should read him, Crossing the Lynching. We just lost him. He's the most important theologian in America and one of the great moral voices of our time. But as James kept saying, people will say Malcolm was so radical. Malcolm said what he said in Harlem. When King got up and said what he said in Montgomery, it meant that the next day walking down the street, he could be dead. And I think that we have to uncover or find again with us that kind of moral courage represented by the great figures of resistance. And we have to begin what we saw in South Africa, which brought down apartheid, which is non-cooperation.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to end up disagreeing here with his path forward. And what I want to say about Martin Luther King, I mean, he's absolutely correct, right? You could say things in Harlem. Harlem was a hotbed for radical activity. A lot of great civil rights activists and a lot of great socialists came out of Harlem and said good stuff in Harlem. Like, Malcolm X was advocating for, like, revolution. But when Martin Luther King said what he said in Montgomery, that's when it became a problem and he became a big media figure. But under Martin Luther King, a lot of the civil rights efforts were very successful. They were able to, fight segregation and get a lot of these racist laws repealed. Then Martin Luther King started talking about economic justice. Martin Luther King started saying, now we're moving towards more racial justice and we're changing our systems to be less racist and less like what the country was founded on. But now we need economic justice. And he said, you can call it socialism, democracy, whatever you want to call it. There needs to be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children. And that's when he died. And that's when the FBI paid a settlement to his family to probably brush under the rug the way they facilitated him being killed. Same with, And Malcolm X was advocating revolution from the beginning, but they killed him too. And of course, Fred Hampton, same thing, advocating economic organization. Fred Hampton was bringing breakfast to impoverished kids and teaching them about economics and teaching them about socialism. And they burned down the floor of the Black Panthers headquarters where all the files and organizing things were kept on that breakfast program, right? They wanted to burn down the organization that was feeding children and telling them about the flaws in the system so that they could continue to maintain the system. It's when you start talking about class and when you start talking about economic injustice and when you start talking about the way that the capitalist class control society because of how production is organized at its base, like Martin Luther King talked about, like Fred Hampton talked about, like Malcolm X talked about, that they start to kill you, right? And what we need isn't civil disobedience. I mean, we do need civil disobedience, but more than that, we need more organization, right? We need more planning. We need more solidarity among working class people, and we need more community organizing, right? The reason why the U.S. government burned the third floor, or whatever floor it was of the Black Panthers headquarters, where they had all the organization stuff for their breakfast programs, was because the Black Panthers were extremely organized, and they knew that it was going to be difficult, and they had to build a strong and active active organization if they were going to meet the community's needs and educate the community about socialism. So more so than disobedience and uprising and saying the right things, we need organization and organization of the masses. Here, as is common with a lot of people in the West, and I definitely wouldn't call Chris Hedges a liberal, of course, but, we're all susceptible to liberalism because we live in a neoliberal society. He's automatically, focusing on the great men of history, right? Rather than talking about community and economic organization at the base of society among the working classes, he's talking about, this is what Malcolm X did versus this is what Martin Luther King did, and we need to make our strategy going forward based on that. Great men, and political speakers like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X are great. They're inspirational, they're educational, but they're only great because they organize people at the base of society. Like we were saying with the Black Panthers, they organize people using those breakfast programs in their community. They organize mass mobilization efforts, right? That is how change happens, when you have mass movements of people who are organized and in solidarity with one another, and they have a specific demands to make. But we'll see what Chris Hedges says. Maybe he says something similar to that. I don't know.
We have to do everything in our power to build alternative structures to pit power against power, and we have to do everything in our power to obstruct the workings of the corporate state.
So there he kind of saved himself. He said basically what I said. We have to build structures and organizations to fight power with power, right? I think a lot of Marxists and a lot of leftists are a little bit naive about power right now, right? How power can be taken from the ruling class. A lot of people look at politics and they say, how can I be the most moral? How can I be the most correct? How can I take the most correct positions? Which is good, right? You want to have a scientific understanding of the economy, and make sure you're taking, moral and good positions that are going to move society forward. But, more important than that is organizing people and having solidarity and actually building the organizations and structures necessary to take power from the bourgeois class, who has everything, who has the press, who has the military, who has the state, who controls the education through lobbying. It's going to take tons of organization and education and hard work to bring people into solidarity, enough to the point where they can actually threaten and gain political power, gain power of the state, and create a dictatorship of the proletariat.
And that's what the Wobblies did. That's what the old CIO did. That's what they did in the civil rights movement. That's what the Communist Party did. That's what the Progressive Party did. We have antecedents. They erased this from American history. That's what the Bonus Marchers did.
Yes, this is fire. He's going off right now. He's basically saying what I said, right? All the successful worker organizations who have actually been able to force the state to do anything were extremely organized, and they took on power head on, and they really threatened power. And he talks about the Communist Party, and he talks about how this has been removed from American history, right? You're never told that after the Great Depression there were mass worker organizations, and the Communist Party at the time had 1 million members, and in the 1940s after World War II, people wanted to keep all the jobs that were created in the war, so you had more wildcat and more labor strikes than any other time in U.S. history. And these labor organizations are what got Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the New Deal, all these kind of social democratic policy positions that allowed for the American labor aristocracy, as some people call it, or talk about it, to come about, and all these pro-worker policies got enacted. It was through class struggle, and this is completely written out of history, right? You never hear about how the 1940s had more wildcat strikes than any other time in American history, or about how during World War II there were 1 million card-carrying communists in the U.S. And this is the reason that workers got anything. That's the reason we have weekends. That's the reason we don't have child labor, right? Is because workers had to take power head on in their organizations. And that's how the basic things that we take for granted today were fought and gained for. And the reason that that's written out of history is so we don't know how to go forward, right? So we don't look at the past and say, oh, we need millions of communists, a bunch of worker organizations, and we all need to go on strike unless they give us what they want, and we need to take state power as workers, and we need to build these structures that are capable of gaining power. They don't want us to see that that's what working people did in the past, because then we'll do it again. And then we'll actually gain state power. Or then we'll gain some real concessions for workers, or really threaten the bourgeoisie. So it needs to be written out of history, which is one of the most interesting things about becoming a Marxist, is you realize basically the way you've been taught history your whole life is a lie, right? People focus on these great men, right? All the social programs and all the good things that happened for workers in the last century were because of FDR, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt was this pro-labor president, and he handed us everything. No, worker organizations, labor unions, and card-carrying communists forced FDR to give concessions to workers with the threat of taking over the government completely and transitioning to socialism. And that is our path forward.
Force. And, politics is a game of fear, and we have to make them frightened of us. That's our goal. That's the only way they're kept in check. So there's a passage in Kissinger's memoirs, which hopefully is not being sold in this bookstore. Do not go buy it. It's 1971. Tens of thousands of anti-war protesters around the White House. Nixon has put empty city buses end to end around the White House as barricades, and he's standing at the window looking out, wringing his hands next to Kissinger, going, Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us. It's our job to make people in power feel fear.
This is why my favorite story of all time is when Richard Nixon went to Venezuela to spread goodwill, and the Venezuelan people destroyed his motorcade and said, get out of our country or we're going to kill you. They made him feel the actual power they had as workers and the actual frustration they had as workers. And a lot of Latin American working classes have always been better at organizing and actually fighting for power than the American working class. But exactly, right? You need to actually threaten power. You need to show that you're actually serious about gaining power, which is what we're very far from in the U.S. Not that me Twitch streaming and making YouTube videos is the next step. Community and worker organization at the base of society that can actually threaten the capitalist class at the top of society is how we can actually threaten their power, because we as workers create all their value. We create all their profits. So if we're organized and we threaten to withhold our labor, they have to do what we want, because capitalists don't actually do anything. They just steal from us.
That's our job. And until we do that, and believe me, I have relatives who are on Wall Street. And Zuccotti, which was absolutely did not pose any physical threat to these predators on Wall Street, they were terrified. They wouldn't even go out for lunch. They had all their private security firms tweeting or telling them every hour, they're on Bond Street now. They have a giant puppet octopus in front of Goldman Sachs. Really. There are a lot. Why they're so scared? Because they know even better than we do how corrupt and fixed the system is.
That's true. People at the top understand that they don't do anything. But yeah, this is a good point. It's like people think about revolution and they think about, we're just gonna, they sort of think of the Russian Revolution, but only like the day it happened, right? Only the day they marched on the Capitol and overthrew the Tsar and took control of the state, right? There was a lot that led up to that, and that's not all that revolution is, right? Nobody's saying go to the White House and kick President Biden out and say, hey, we have control now, right? That's what the Trumpers did. That's what the Capitol rioters did. That is not the path to socialism. But if you had organizations and unions who did like what the Alabama Union is doing right now, and you go outside of the hedge funds and the company who owns you, sure, they can call in the police and the military to suppress you. But, these are people who work at a hedge fund. These are capitalists who have never done physical labor in their lives, right? If you go with a group of workers and you stand outside the company, they're going to be scared, and you can actually demand things of them, and if that happened on a mass scale, you could absolutely have a revolution. Like, imagine if everybody just went to Jeff Bezos's yacht and said, hey, dude, we're going to tip your yacht over. We're going to start throwing we're gonna sink your yacht unless you pay all your workers $25 an hour, and you have to sign this contract right now. You could force them to do that. You would need tons of organization, right? You would need the organization and the solidarity to do it and a group to do it. But you could totally start threatening power as soon as you start threatening the bourgeoisie directly, right? As soon as we take our focus just a little bit off the political sphere, just a little bit off of what Pelosi, Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Trump, and Joe Biden are doing, and we look at economic organizing and community organizing, and we look at directly targeting the bourgeoisie and directly targeting their power and their wealth, which is all generated by our labor.
That's why Bernanke was on his knees. And unfortunately, Obama didn't stand up for us. He stood up for the bankers. So that's it. That's the only hub. We haven't even talked about climate change. I mean, that's why Standing Rock is so important. That's why blocking the railroad tracks in the Northwest who are bringing down the Pitman that's what we got to do. That's it. And
targeting the places where value is created in society. And Carlos and I have started calling this kind of the pressure point theory, right? The theory in Marxism was always that the industrial proletariat were going to be the ones to lead the revolution. You know, most of the places where we've actually seen Marxist revolutions happen, it's been either the agricultural proletariat, the peasants, or a combination of industrial workers and peasants, like in Russia. But in the U.S., if you look, even though we have a super service-based economy, the place where value is created in the economy is in those productive jobs. So say if you have a group of rail workers, there's something like 40,000 rail workers in the U.S., or I don't know if that's the exact number, but if they are organized and they all go on strike and the railroads stop running, the entire economy is going to shut down because of how vital that railroad is. So that is like a pressure point that you can use to demand political power. So these are the areas where we need to organize, and these are the things we need to start thinking about in order to threaten the power of the bourgeoisie directly, like I was talking about. Where is value being created in society? Where are the most vital pressure points of the economy where we can focus our organization and try and threaten power and profits? We were talking about the general strike earlier, right? The general strike is a cool idea, but you're just relying on everybody's morality. You're hoping everybody will not go to work that day and demand that the government adhere to our demands, right? Rather than a general strike, we need targeted strikes, organization in the main areas of the economy that can actually threaten power. So, yeah.
And I think they understand how hated they are. And that makes them weak, and that gets into the whole issue of violence as the great. And then we're talking about revolution, by the way. I'm talking about the overthrow of the corporate state. And for the Homeland Security person who's here, that's overthrow, O-V-E-R. Because these people are going to kill us, and they're going to kill my children. And in the end, you know, these corporate forces have us. They have us by the throat, and they have my kids by the throat. And I don't know if we're going to win. I don't even know if we're going to survive as a species. But in the end, I don't fight fascism because I win. I fight fascists because they are fascists.
Chris Hedges is fed up, and he's making a good point. Like I said, you know, people like David Harvey, who's an academic based in the UK, and Vijay Prashad recently just called him out in a video that we should also review, maybe not tonight, but at some point. He's like a post-leftist, right? He's like, there's no escaping capitalism. It's like, okay, you're in a comfortable position as a professor in the United States, and also you're not going to face the climate crisis that us and our kids are going to have to face, right? So I'm not that interested in saying that, you know, revolution isn't possible. Even if it is impossible, we still have to fight for it, or they're going to destroy the planet and kill all of us. Right? So what's the point? Do you want to just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, I'm a post-leftist now because the bourgeoisie has a lot of power? Or are we going to organize and try and fight back before they destroy the only planet that we have? Well, that's not true. I guess we could just wait for Elon to take us to Mars. Maybe that's a better option.
And that moral, almost religious quality is one that we have to embrace, what Niebuhr calls sublime madness. That understanding that radical evil must be opposed, even if everything around us says that we will fail. And when we find that, and when we have the courage to stand up and defy it, we may not win in an ultimate sense, but we will be free. I mean, I teach in a prison. They imposed a rule in the prison that all my students had to walk past the guards down the corridors with their eyes down. And they refused. They walked down the corridors with their eyes up. It sounds little, but it's not. That's what we have to do. And we have to understand that not the Democratic Party, no system now, there are no institutions in this country left that are authentically democratic. There are no institutions that are going to protect us or protect our children or protect the ecosystem on which we depend for life. It's up to us. And at least let us find that courage so that whatever generation comes after us will say they were not passive and they were not complicit.
Dang, that was really good. I agree. I agree with almost everything. The one thing I disagree with there is he talks about, in the prison, they told everyone to keep their eyes down and the people resisted by keeping their eyes up. I mean, that's the cool story of resistance, but that's kind of symbolic, right? It's going to take more than keeping our eyes up. It would take those prisoners organizing together and overthrowing the prison and transitioning that prison to being public rather than being run by private corporations, part of the prison industrial complex. Chris Hedges knows these things, and this right here is what I would call like the spirit of the communist, right? One thing that really, really bugs me is people who are Marxists but not communists, right? As I was talking about with David Harvey, people who say, I'm a Marxist. I like Marxism as a tool of analysis, but we're never moving to another mode of production, right? Capitalism is the last one. We're never going to defeat the current ruling class. It's like, that is ridiculous. One, I don't think that's true. I think we absolutely can defeat the ruling class. And two, we need to at least try so they stop sending our children to fight and die in wars for capitalist expansion as they destroy the planet via climate change. So very cool stuff here from Chris Hedges. I know he's not a communist, but he has that communist spirit to him, so solidarity with him.